But first, how can something be dead wrong 2 years ago? In the exact words of Scott Morrison, a reckless target that will come at a tremendous cost to Australians, but now it's absolutely right. This is the obvious question that the Prime Minister is going to have to answer if he expects to sell quiet Australians his climate policy that centres on higher targets, deeper cuts and billions more in taxpayer expenditure than anything ever proposed by predecessor Prime Ministers Rudd, Gillard, Abbott or Turnbull. But it isn't just the PM and the Nationals leader Barnaby Joyce in the hot seat, so too corporate leaders, following the complete backflip from the Business Council of Australia, which slammed Bill Shorten's 2019 election plan for a 45% emissions cut by 2030, calling it economy wrecking, which now itself is demanding 45 to 50% by 2030, and is also urging the Morrison government to immediately commit to net zero emissions by 2050. The BCA, which represents Australia's 100 or so biggest companies, claims that circumstances have changed since then. Well, wrong. All that's changed is the politics. US President Joe Biden, well, he's nosediving in the polls and clinging to climate issues like a buoy to stay afloat. And the UK's Boris Johnson, well, he's desperate for a diplomatic triumph at next month's Glasgow Climate Conference. He'd sell his once conservative soul to the devil if he could. Hence concerns that both are calling in a blood price from Morrison on the back of the subs deal. Now, the BCA's about face is being hailed as a free pass that'll give the coalition government a chance to change its position without having to worry about the economic consequences of more drastic cuts in emissions or the political blowback. Well, as if. The paper published by the BCA on the weekend is shallow boosterism that should deeply shame an organisation that led the intellectual charge for economic reforms out of the Hawke and Howard eras. This doesn't make political or economic sense. The paper cites Deloitte Access Economics modelling. It says it shows that achieving net zero by 2050 will provide nearly $900 billion in boost to the economy and around 195,000 extra jobs by 2070. Now, Morrison's speech that I quoted at the top of the show just before at the 2019 election, well, it claimed exactly the opposite. It argued that Shorten's 2030 target, almost the same as the BCA's modelling, it would in fact hit the economy by about $500 billion, slash over 300,000 jobs, cut wages, and increase your power prices by a whopping 58%. So who do we believe now? The old Morrison from the election campaign 2019, new net zero ScoMo, or the climate converts over at the BCA? Let's pass over the implausibility of being able to model anything with precision 50 years away. I mean, we can't even get the budget right within the 4-year budget cycle, let alone 50. Are you surprised that the working papers, the modelling papers here, weren't published? No, I wasn't. Or that the numbers were all based on what they're saying are avoided warming damage to the economy, and that the benefits of low-cost renewable electricity production come through. Benefits? What benefits? Would that be the benefits that the UK is currently enjoying as a result of relying on renewables for up to 40% of their power? Whereas our own Energy Minister Angus Taylor is describing the UK, he says, their reliance on gas imports, constrained gas supplies and a prolonged wind drought have plunged the country into an extraordinary energy crisis. Taylor's also said this week that the UK's energy crisis has literally stopped industry in its tracks. Jobs are uncertain, production of critical outputs has been paused, and bills have skyrocketed. Yet Angus Taylor wants you to let him bring that sort of energy chaos here to Australia. We're being asked to jeopardise affordable and reliable fossil fuel-based power now in the mere hope that something will be developed in the future to replace it. With a government too gutless to keep the most viable baseload emissions-free option on the table, which is nuclear, it's a big call. This is building as an almost perfect storm for the Prime Minister. And it's far more than just a party showdown between the so-called modern or left liberals from the rich Tesla driving electorates in leafy suburbs, and the disparaged but politically astute redneck nationals, that's what they call them, representing coal miners in the poorer regional seats. If it was just as simple as that, a fight in the party room, it might be possibly fixable with another round of rural pork barrelling. Instead, there's something far more important at stake here. Politicians with elastic principles and no conceivable convictions are what drive our despair about public life. While it might seem that Cabinet has forgotten that the coalition was elected in 2013 to end Labor's emissions obsession, I've no doubt its supporters haven't. Forget all the polls and the loaded questions designed to feed the media's obsession with climate change. The political reality of the last 20 years isn't told via polls, but via real votes in real elections. They're the only polls that matter. And this is a reality. Most of the media have forgotten this, or they try and gloss it over. Kevin Rudd's flawed carbon pollution reduction scheme that Malcolm Turnbull crossed the floor to vote for, and let's not forget, that's what hastened Rudd's demise. Julia Gillard only limped over the line in 2010 and into a hung parliament when she promised no carbon tax under a government I lead. And when she broke her promise, she helped secure Abbott's landslide win in 2013 when he vowed, "You elect me, I'll repeal it." In 2016, Turnbull narrowly survived after losing 14 seats because the National Party kept his Green left zealotry at bay. When that zealotry came back in 2018, his party room handed the job to Scott Morrison, who himself won a miracle win in 2019 by standing firm against Bill Shorten's uncosted emissions madness. That Australians care about the environment, that's not the issue. They do. And our country has an extraordinary record of conservation. But net zero by 2050 and its many emissions variations before it, it isn't just an environmental issue, it's an economic issue. And it's an issue of national security. This is what's at stake against a background of global capital rent seekers, the billionaires, the bankers, the big corporates, all desperate for another way to make money by way of global taxpayer trillions, and you, the consumer, bearing the brunt of soaring costs for life's essentials. This is not a question of should we protect our environment. That's a given. It's how we protect it. By making our nation poorer and our energy security here more precarious at one of the most volatile times in our history, well, to me, that just defies common sense. That's even before you take into account the reality that whatever we do here in Australia, in practical terms, is meaningless, given we account for less than 1.5% of global emissions. Forget the election campaign. Right now, the Prime Minister is campaigning to keep his political base and putting up a worse version of the very policy they rejected from Bill Shorten at the last election is not how you do it. I tell you, the only hope here, it would appear, is the National Party.